Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Today, we're diving into a topic that's reshaping the way customers interact with their banks and fintech apps: personalization. What does it really mean to create personalized experiences in financial services? Is it just about offering custom product suggestions, or is it about rethinking how we build, design, and deliver value to each individual user? With consumers expecting even more relevance and 91% of people saying they're more likely to engage with brands offering personalized recommendations, fintechs and banks are under increasing pressure to deliver smarter, more tailored experiences. I'm David Barton-Grimley, and in this episode, we'll unpack why personalization has become a strategic priority for fintechs, how it's boosting customer loyalty and driving competitive advantage, and the role of emerging technologies from AI to chatbots in taking personalization to the next level. We'll also explore how data, both online and offline, is being used responsibly and effectively, and what it takes to build trust in a world where 48% of consumers say they're willing to share more data for better service. So let's dive in and see who's on our panel today. Firstly, we have a FinTech Insider return for Daniel Gold, CEO of Stratify. Thank you for joining us today, Daniel. Tell us a little bit more about Stratify.
Thanks for having me back. So what we're building is essentially your wealth manager in your pocket. So Stratify is a mobile app that enables everyday investors to create their own investment strategies so they can benefit from sophisticated investing and risk management techniques, but to do so in an accessible and fun format.
Awesome. Welcome on board. And also with us today is Fernanda Doval, Director of Product at Clio. Welcome back to the show, Fernanda. What have you been up to since we last spoke?
Great to be back. We've got some exciting things planned soon, but one big update for us is we recently reached 1 million monthly active users. So
Amazing.
been working on providing personalized insights to a lot of people.
Yeah, excited to hear more about that. And last but not least, we have Ken Hart, CEO of Snowdrop Solutions. Welcome to the show, Ken. Could you tell us a little bit more about what Snowdrop does?
Sure, thanks for having me here, Jared. Snowdrop's been around for about 12 years. We're a UK company. We provide transaction enrichment and AI capabilities for retail banks. So today we power over 2.5 billion transactions. We clean up the transactions on a monthly basis, and we work with about 60 banks and all the transactions over 200 territories. So very pleased to be here.
Amazing. I mean, I think what's awesome about each of you is that individually you come from kind of different angles on the personalization debate. And so on that note, why don't we start with a bit of a definition of what we think personalization is today, in 2025. So I, for one, have been talking about personalization for well over a decade. It's like a big chunk of my career in consulting is how do we personalize? How do we really do this? But what is it today? So I'm going to start by going around the panel. Daniel, I'll come to you first. Like, how do you define personalization and how are you kind of deploying it in what you do?
Yeah, so the way I think we define personalization is kind of data-driven insights to deliver a sort of a timely and engaging solution that enhances customer satisfaction and financial outcomes. But I think it's important to draw a distinction between kind of the illusion of personalization, which is choice, and true personalization, which is where each customer gets a bespoke solution or service. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And an example of that is sort of the traditional order for robo-advisors, where they were assigning each investor to a risk profile and then assigning a portfolio to them. So everyone ultimately gets the same portfolio. Whereas I think you can go a lot further than that and provide a truly bespoke portfolio to each client. And that's where real personalization comes in.
Oh, fascinating. And Fernando, what do you think?
Yeah, for us, personalization is really about meeting our users where they are. So we're building the world's first AI financial assistant. And so for us, it's not just about what you say, but also when you say it. Because we're talking about behavior change and helping people reach their own financial goals, it's important to have that relevant information, relevant insights to meet them where they are. So I think of it both in terms of content and when we reach out.
Awesome. Ken?
I agree with both the speakers. I'm going to add a little bit more details, if you will. It's not only, I would argue, the what and the when, but it's also the where. And I would call this more contextually aware. So, if I look at my banking app today, pick whichever one you want, all those transactions are mine, right? They're personal. Problems, I don't understand them. They don't make sense to me. They're not relevant in the where and the when. So I would argue personalization, I think Daniel said this, can be very elusive. It's really about building context. And then when you have that clarity in that context, then you can really understand what people are looking for.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And Daniel, it'd be good to get your perspective on the kind of global view. How are you seeing like different kind of markets and like adapt to different personalization laws and different perspectives and behaviors on how you would do that. And, and it's a question for each of you as well to jump in on, because what is personalization to one customer in one country or in one sector is going to be very, very different. I mean, like the example of transactional banking data versus, financial advisor personalization are in some ways very, very different, right?
Yeah, I mean, the global view kind of depends on a lot of different factors. I mean, different markets are more ready for personalization, and that comes from the regulatory side of things and also from the readiness of consumers. But on the regulatory side, I mean, there's a couple of regulations here in the UK you can look at which are quite progressive in terms of personalization. I mean, consumer duty is a big one that's come in the last couple of years, and that recognizes at its core that personalization is a key benefit that the FCA wants to promote. But that needs to be reconciled with the traditional oversight function of the FCA, which is imposing this advice guidance boundary. So they are also limiting personalization, and for good reason. So that is something that the FCA is reconciling at the moment. But the FCA, I think, as I say, taking quite a progressive stance. They're also looking at relaxing their constraints, for example, by introducing targeted support rules, allowing for simplified advice based on identifiable factors. So this means that you can start categorizing customers into certain segments and then saying that this particular product or service might be appropriate for you based on what category you fit into. So I think there's a lot of regulation which is coming in the UK, which is promoting personalization. And in terms of, to take it a bit further, open architecture, open banking, and open finance, I think the UK was at the forefront of this whole movement. And that's really sort of turbocharging personalization. But taking a global view, I think the UK has been recognized as slightly falling behind in that in the last few years. In Europe and Australia are overtaking at the moment. So there's, different markets are at different stages, but I think the general direction of travel is still towards personalization on the whole.
Yeah, and I guess as more data becomes more available and more standardized, then, you can then do something with that data. I suppose this has been one of the issues with open banking is that there's just not much data available. Yeah, there's transactional data and all of that kind of stuff, but to get that holistic picture of a customer, you need just much more data sources. Fernanda, I'd love to get your perspective. Is there anything that you're seeing maybe in the market in the US, for example, with where Clio operates that's maybe different?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the big shift is around consumer behavior, consumer expectations of personalization, but also AI more broadly, right? We're looking at conversational interfaces having gone full on mainstream in the US. And we did some recent research showing openness to using AI and this big shift that's happening as people become more comfortable with these technologies. And we see, finance is such a taboo topic. It's something people feel a lot of shame around. They don't want to admit they don't know yet. And so sometimes personalization is just the right information at the right time or the right educational content at the right time. I don't want to admit that I don't know what's going on with my 401k, my pension in the US, to my peers. And so then I can ask an AI, I can start to talk about what are the gaps in my own behavior that I should be mitigating. And so from that perspective, we see a really interesting shift. People aren't Googling anymore so much as they are using these tools. And it's how we position ourselves, not just, we don't give regulated financial advice at Clio. It's more around closing that gap around managing your personal finances. And we see there's a huge demand for that, increasingly so with AI.
Yeah, because I guess AI is going to give the customer the ability to access that knowledge in a much easier way, whereas it used to be through kind of interfaces and graphs and UI, which in some ways I found has been very difficult to kind of show.
Right.
Yeah.
And so personalization can be, I've got these insights about your spending, about your data, these patterns that are relevant to you, but it can also be this generic piece of information that I know you're missing presented at the right time.
Yeah, 100%. Ken, what are you seeing from the kind of the technical side of things, like the availability of data, I suppose, to provide these insights? Have there been any major shifts?
It's still a long, hard slog, right? So if you think about just transactional debit or credit card data, we've been cleaning this up now for 8 years. And if you're right, as the point you made earlier, open banking is just a poorer cousin of already bad transaction data. And so it's really hard to come up with those signals about user behaviors who can ascertain what's going on. But if you take a step back, at least I'm not going to talk about the wealth management that, the other people could talk much better than I. If you look at what's called PFN, personal finance tools, they've been around for 7-8 years. 5 to 10% of people use them, no more. It's exactly what you said. No one clicks on the charts or the graphs. It's not engaging. It's not meaningful. To tell me that I'm out of money doesn't give me more money, right? And so what people really want is, be it the natural conversation that Fernando's talking about, you can actually have a conversation with someone and it's intuitive. So our big belief is that you need to enrich in what poor data or existing data is out there. You need to contextually blend it together, and then you create what we call intuitive experiences. So, if I asked you, David, how much does your car cost? You would have to go chronologically probably through all your different transactions. Well, that was gas, that was parking, that was the repair shop, that was the Department of Motor Vehicles, right? Instead, an interface could just pull that together and say, you're spending X, you probably should lease instead. You may save some money. So that's the difference from coming from very poor graphs and charts on PFMs that people don't engage with, and actually talking a natural language with people and making it intuitive. The right thing, the right way, the right subject matter they want to talk about.
Yeah, 100%. And building on what you were saying, now we have maybe slightly more dependable data sources. You've got an AI that has the ability for, a customer to have conversations or at least interpret the data that they see and ask something of it. Fernanda, I want to come to you because Clio is a very interesting case study for this, because Clio, I think, was one of the very first fintechs out there that was allowing that kind of conversation between the customer and the fintech as a first principles way of interacting. I mean, I remember all the way back 8 years ago when Clio started, that was it, right? It was the chat window. You could talk and interact with it. If we fast forward now to 2025, what are you seeing customers ask? And, the extent to which they want that personalized experience versus just tell me,
Yeah, well, I think it's a real mix. From what customers are asking, I think one of the things that brings a lot of value is being able to see all your information in one place, so we can connect multiple accounts and really have that big picture view. But we do have an insight that people don't always know what they don't know. And so being able to proactively reach out and kind of preempt what's going on in a person's journey, whether that's your paycheck just come in just came in? Do we need to talk about how you're going to spend it for the next month? Do you have bills coming up? That sort of just-in-time interaction is really important to us because, like we said before, your financial health can be taboo. It can be something you're kind of, oh, I don't even want to look at it. I know I overspent on my credit card. And so initiating that conversation is super important. But we have this great feature, for example, called challenges, where people can set up a spending challenge for the week ahead, 2 weeks ahead for a particular category. And we've seen users curb spending by over $12 million by using these challenges and kind of chip away at these micro behaviors, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's very cool. Daniel, what's your perspective on this in the kind of wealth industry? What are people asking?
So it's a slightly different approach for us. I mean, I think the sort of chat approach is hugely powerful, and it's certainly something we got our eye on. I think it's going to be part of the future. But the way we use, AI for personalization is slightly different. We're using more traditional machine learning techniques for parameter optimization. So it's kind of lower down the food chain. But people, to answer the question, it's similar to what Fernando was saying. They don't always know what they don't know. They need to, they can give a view on what they want to achieve in terms of goals, objectives, investing style. But I think they want to rely on that combination of inputs plus a sophisticated, investment engine behind the scenes. That combination of tools gives the real power to people. So giving the choice in the inputs in a digestible format, and then hiding away the complexity and the processing behind the scenes is what we're seeing. It's what our view is of what people want.
It's very interesting. Abstract out that complexity. Give me a few controls that allow me to personalize to an extent. Otherwise, just do the thing for me. No, that's very interesting. And I want to pivot the conversation to protecting the customers and security. And I think, Ken, it'd be very good to get your perspective on this, that kind of meta view, all of those billions of transactions that you're looking through and standardizing and cleaning. Like, how does personalization enhance a customer's security? I mean, I guess there is this balanced trade-off between knowing a lot about the customer, but then maybe also knowing too much about the customer and getting to a point where, I don't know, maybe you're beginning to step a little bit too far into privacy. I mean, how do some of your customers maybe think about that?
Yeah, I'd like to, there is definitely a spectrum, even if you look just in Europe. So, for example, we have customers that in the UK deploy everything. You show on a map where people are spending their money. People are very comfortable doing that now, at least in the UK. That wasn't the case a few years ago. And that transparency, here's where you're spending your money, click, get more detail about it, builds trust. I also have customers in, say, Germany that literally freak out whenever they see a map. And they're very arguably, I would say, obsessed on privacy. So just even in Europe, the consumer behavior is radically different. We also have customers to do stuff like, this may be germane today with some fines that have been levied recently with the FCA, people who do KYC. So they'll register for an account. Maybe they've given not the perfect address, Buckingham Palace or, 10 Downing Street without naming names. We all know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
what we can also do is say, well, why don't we track your phone for the next 30 days if you're comfortable with that, because maybe you don't have a utility bill that you can snap and share to confirm your address. So it's really getting that trade-off between, convenience and really security. So we work a variety of ways. There's no one silver bullet, if you will. That personalization is just more secure. In fact, if anything, at least with the big traditional retail banks, the more personal information, the more risk averse are the banks and the more fearful they are.
Yeah, I guess in some ways it gets terrifying as you're ingesting more and more and more information. You then have to figure out what to do with it. I mean, Fernando, how do you think about those trade-offs between, knowing lots and lots about the customer and their security and finding more and more sources of data to enrich this kind of picture.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the reasons why we've decided to build a lot of this in-house. And, the more data we have, the bigger responsibility we have with our customers. That's how we like to think about it. And so managing that data thoughtfully from kind of a first principles perspective. I know in the US it's very different, right? You don't have some of the regulations that you have here in the UK, but a lot of our product team is here. And so that's the way we approach and think about these things. This is with this UK-centric view, while respecting kind of the regulations of the US. But yeah, I think even when looking at how we work with AI, for example, right, and what kind of data we're going to send or how we're going to process that data to ensure that people are seeing reliable information when we're using LLMs, for instance, is something we do very thoughtfully.
Interesting. Daniel, how do you think about it?
So I'm an optimist at heart. So I think the opportunities are vast when you have access to more data. So that's our whole, the basis of how we built our whole kind of business case is, getting access to data gives you the ability to provide professional style oversight and investing techniques. But that oversight extends into things like trade surveillance, fraud detection, transaction monitoring, which are techniques which are employed in a sophisticated way within banks, but not always done so in the wealth management and investment management space. But I think they have huge potential. I mean, I think everyone can relate to the case when you get like a bank calling you up about a transaction and blocking it until you've approved it, right? It's a bit of friction, but we all appreciate not being susceptible to fraudsters as we might otherwise be. So that's the benefit I see. I think you kind of touched on an important point, though, that if this becomes too personal or too intrusive into someone's behavior, then it becomes creepy. And that's a fine line to paraphrase. I think it's the CEO of Wealth CX, but it's a quote which I thought resonates quite a lot in this context.
Yeah, it definitely does. You definitely don't want to be creepy. That's for sure to your customers. And on that note, we're just going to take a quick break. Back shortly.
The McDonald's snack wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch snack wrap. Spicy snack wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's vanta.com/insider. Welcome back to FinTech Insider Insights. And in this next part, we're going to be diving into how we can build better personalization in this current climate whilst navigating changing needs and new technologies. So let's dive back in. So before the break, we were talking about the trade-off in, maybe being too creepy, I think, as Daniel was saying, versus security and privacy, all of these kind of trade-offs that you need to make in personalization. I think it's worth having a discussion also around data sources. So where do we see in the future more data sources that are going to be powering this personalization? Because at the end of the day, you can have an LLM that sits on top of something and do something great, but that LLM has to be powered by very good quality data that comes from somewhere. So we were talking about open banking in the first part, and Ken, I think it might be worth coming to you for that kind of meta view. Like, where do you see better sources of data coming in? Is open banking, going to be that source?
Probably not, to answer your question directly. So the example that I have in mind is we're working on a project to help people from the Middle East to invest in real estate in the UK. Think of it the first step towards mass affluent, high net worth individuals. And what we're using there is nothing with open banking data, right? We're using maybe some of the people's spending behaviors and income and so forth. But what we're really doing is linking to Zoopla, Rightmove, Land Registry, and other data to sort of ground the AI. That's real property. It exists. Here it is. Here's the valuation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to be able to think beyond, frankly, the banking sector or the financial services sector and pull in really good data sets from other sectors. Real estate, we do a lot with maps, right? With Google Maps. That's part of our core business. So we're very familiar with that. But I'm sure other industries will pull in stuff from maybe insurance or healthcare or whatever it may be. But I think you need to look beyond open banking data.
Yeah. Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about this question is kind of the short-term answer and a long-term answer, at least in the context of our business. So short-term, we're dealing with the traditional problems of data sources that banks and wealth managers always access. So pricing data feeds from different trading exchanges. And this is a perennial problem. It's a complex challenge, and we can probably have a podcast, or at least I could have a podcast on that all on itself. But the personalization doesn't come from those data sources as such. It's more in how we use the data and the derived data we generate from it. So we do personalized analytics for each user based on those common data sources. So, for example, if you want to invest into US tech stocks, we'll analyze those according to your criteria, generate those bespoke signals for you. So that's I think distilling my answer down is that I think we can create new data sources nowadays using cloud computing and sophisticated AI. But to take a longer term outlook, again, from the context of our business, I think there are actually really interesting opportunities in open finance and open banking. We can, I'm not saying this is what we can do, but there are, ways you can incorporate open banking, open finance data to create a whole budgeting app, so you can incorporate your investment lifestyle along with your spending patterns and look for opportunities to save costs on your bills and transfer those into your investments. And creating that holistic solution for people is possible now with these new data sources. And I think is a really exciting future.
Yeah. Fernando, what do you think?
Daniel, were you just describing Cleo?
Maybe.
Oh, what a plug. I love that.
No, so bear with me as I get a little bit technical, but I think one thing we're seeing that's really exciting in the context of LLMs and AI is this idea of making data interoperable. So Anthropic's come out with Model Context Protocol, and MCP, it sounds like a fancy techie thing, but really you just think of it as a USB-C port for data towards LLMs and frontier models. So how will data sources communicate with these frontier models so that can be ingested in real time in a way that lets us unlock some of these opportunities? And I think we'll see this become more and more mainstream in the short future.
Yeah, I agree. Are any of you using MCPs or thinking of developing them?
Yeah, so we're gonna have different agents, one doing mortgages, one doing your spending, one doing your car ownership, and they all need to work together. Things that we're going to build, things that our clients will build, and they need to talk together.
Yeah. And as you look into the future, I mean, are you seeing these agents really cut a meaningful amount of time out of either, stitching these data sources together or standardizing or cleansing them? Can you look forward into the future and say, like, actually, gosh, there's a huge reduction in cost and effort and value, increase in value to our customers?
Without a doubt, we went from deploying a new country in 5 days, now it takes 5 minutes.
That's absolutely incredible. Because I think what all of you have been saying is that, like, these sources of data, also Ken, what you were saying is open banking, at the moment, it's not, it's not too much, right? Data is still very...
It's not the only thing, is what I'm saying. You need to combine it with other data sources.
Yeah. But also that it's hard, right? Like it's hard. A lot of this data is not standardized. It doesn't come from a single source. It's everywhere, and you kind of have to figure it out. And there's an absolute ton of it. But I think, Daniel, what you were saying in the future is very interesting. I mean, if you look at some of the moves going on in the UK for open finance, I don't know I cannot remember offhand the name of the bill. I'm sure our listeners can Google it up. But there is a bill going through the House of Lords at the moment for open finance. And so if you get to that future, And if that future comes in, then yeah, maybe you do have a more standardized data set, which is more available and easier to consume. So that could be interesting. And I know there are some countries out there that do this incredibly well. I mean, people reference countries like India and Brazil and maybe Singapore, for example, which do some of these things a little bit better. But it sounds from what all of you are saying that it's AI and LLMs that's really the big kind of area.
It is, but I think that it's important to recognize there are still big challenges.
Yeah.
I mean, just turning to the open finance bill, I mean, there's features we're waiting for to come out, which I personally can't understand why they haven't been implemented years ago. One example I can give is variable recurring payments. So, the ability to sort of draw funds from an account on demand. You can do it for single payments at the moment. This is supported in open banking, but you can't do it for recurring payments. So you can't replace standing orders or direct debits in the open banking world. And it's a mystery why it takes so long, but it's a big organizations, regulation, and it is, I think. And then there's also, I think there needs to be a bit of patience from customers as well in terms of how far we can go and how fast we can go. We can obviously push forward as fast as we want to as businesses, but there's a lot of complexity in what we're building. And if we push forward too fast, I think that introduces risks. And, we don't want to taint the image of the industry and personalization by going too fast and introducing things that haven't been fully thought through.
Yeah, what happens when something goes wrong, I suppose, is a question. I mean, a lot of the conversation about LLMs is things like, auditability, hallucinations. Fernanda, how do you think about some of those risks associated with utilizing these new foundational models?
Yeah, so it's really about building the architecture around the models. And I think we're seeing that MCP's tools are a way to not just inject reliable data so that the LLM doesn't have the opportunity to hallucinate. It won't interpret that, right? It just presents it. But it also creates an audit trail for us to see what happened in those instances that we can then understand, because part of the original problem with LLMs, they're a bit of a black box. You don't know why it's made, the choices it has. And so with tools, with a modular system that mixes both on Rails and more LLM-driven conversations, we're able to, create an evaluation loop. I'm often saying evaluation, I think, is one of the things that's really defensible about these AI systems. We call wrapper companies around the foundation models. And that audit trail, as we scale, as these becomes more mainstream, is just increasingly important.
Yeah. And are you seeing, I mean, kind of question for you, are you seeing some of the foundation model businesses, really pay attention to that? I mean, are you seeing, as you scale agents, are you actually seeing that it's able to handle that scale?
Yeah. So the scaling up in terms of the number of transactions, that's actually not too difficult of a problem. If you just take a step outside of the UK for a moment, we're deploying now in places like, as I mentioned, the Middle East, but also Southeast Asia. Just think, I don't know, Philippines, maybe 110 million people, many of them unbanked. Cambodia, 17 million, Vietnam, I think it's 120 million. You have huge populations that are, the first thing they're going to do is probably get a banking app, right? If you think about companies in Singapore like Grab, which is like the Uber, if you will. So what we're seeing out there is they scale up these models quite well, especially if people are getting banking into banking for the first time. Daniel, maybe eventually move up quickly into wealth management, I would hope for you. But, there's still a huge tens of, millions of people that just want basic banking services. So as long as you're able to get all the tools correctly functioning in that way, we can add in a different country or different language relatively easily. It's the more complex stuff, car ownership, home ownership, looking at my bills associated with that, tying it into a tax agent. Those are much more complex. So it's also staying within your knitting, what you're good at, and making sure you can scale that up quickly. The one thing I would mention is, the UK has been really much a leader at the forefront for many years and stuff. But again, if you look in Southeast Asia, they're using QR codes. They're going off the traditional payment rails, yet another data source that needs to be integrated, right? And there's a whole number of reasons for these sort of things. So I think there will be, again, the idea of a super app in Southeast Asia or China, if you will. Again, it's not they do one thing really well. They do lots of things, kind of a Swiss Army knife. They're just different approaches to this stuff.
I'd love to add to that. I think the cultural side is really interesting. I mean, we operate in the US. I'm originally Brazilian. And so we've got PIX, obviously. So the interoperability, which is amazing, like create such a revolution, allowed us to leapfrog, right? A lot of these systems. And I think what's interesting there as well is you have a population that's so used to using WhatsApp for everything and running businesses through WhatsApp. You recently had a bank in Brazil get funded to operate via WhatsApp. And so as we think, again, pulling back to the user and how people's behaviors are changing around the world, it's really not like maybe it'll converge in 5-10 years time, but you're definitely seeing spikes of usage and people leapfrog each other.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, look at Nubank. How massively successful is Nubank, right? Is it because it's hyper personalized? No. It's this, and that's, is Monzo successful, Revolut successful because it's hyper personalized? No. They're transparent, it's clear, it solves friction problems, and it's, that's what people want. They're solving real problems. They're not just piling on layers of personalization for the heck of it.
Yeah. You could make an interesting argument, though, that to your point about unbanked populations, that, yeah, okay, I mean, they're not hyper-personalizing, but they are finding somehow alternative data sources to figure out how to lend. I'm not speaking specifically about Nubank, but I'm speaking about these types of businesses you were talking about earlier, Ken, like Grab, for example. So I suppose what they are doing is...
Grab will set up a bank account for the driver of the car.
Yeah.
They'll give him a car loan.
Yeah.
They'll recommend that he picks people up at these dates. So Grab is much more than a bank, right? If you think about it, if you're driving a car, right? It's really fostering a lot of business. So those are sort of the examples that I would look at that, is that personal? No, they're solving problems for people, though, in a different way.
So I suppose what both of you are saying is that where personalization is going in the future is more value to the customer, not necessarily personalizing for the sake of it. Sorry, Fernanda, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the interesting mental models I have is what are the real world pathways that we're digitizing and personalizing? And what are the ones that don't necessarily exist yet because the human computer interaction is changing? The problems people have are changing, right? And so if you think about financial advisory at a mass scale, that already existed offline for a small group of people who could afford it. But now we're making that mainstream. And in many ways, that's a whole new user journey with new, unique challenges.
Absolutely. Daniel, how do you think about this? Where is this going?
I mean, I think it's a really important point that Ken and Fernando are making, that, personalization for its own sake is not what people want, right? I mean, again, bringing it back to our context, I think the most personalized way of investing is self-directed investing. And that's the oldest way that people would have had access to. They can go and pick their own stocks. And that, I think, is taking it too far for many people, right? Providing a solution that people want, that automation, that sophistication, I think that's the right way to use personalization. So as long as it's, again, repeating what Ken said, transparent, giving people control, and making it trustworthy and explainable, and providing a solution to a real world problem, then I think we're going in the right direction. If it's just giving too much choice and overwhelming and confusing people, it's pushing it too far.
And it also kind of melts, I guess in some way, personalization just sort of melts away. I mean, one of the things I've struggled with it is it's almost always pitched as a layer that sits on top of a product that is out there. It's like, we have a product, we need to figure out how to personalize it. How do we be more relevant and contextual to our customers? But I think what all of you are saying is that when you're able to interact with an LLM, and the user has a degree of control, we no longer really think about personalization anymore, right? We think about just how to be more valuable to our customers. Ken?
Let me give you an example. David, we did some surveys. Again, we work with lots of banks, and sometimes the banks don't really think often about the consumer experience. That's unfortunately the reality of big traditional banks. So we've run some surveys with Google and with them. And what we found is about nearly 40% of people use their banking app on a mobile phone quite frequently, several times actually a day. But all they're doing is checking their balance, seeing if the payment or transfer went through, and then recognizing the transfer the payment, right? That's it. They're doing really simple stuff. Then so let's just get those things better and do it well. We asked in Poland, for example, 55% of Poles just want more control over their money. They don't want endless personalization choices. They just want to feel like they have transparency and control over their money. That's what people want.
100%. Any final words, anyone?
I think the only thing I'd add is that LLMs are a fantastic tool for personalization, but it's not the only tool for the job, and it's not always the right tool for the job. So if you want an analytical answer, an LLM obviously doesn't have an analytical brain behind it. So, that there may be a different tool to provide that analysis. So as long as we use the right tool for the job, is the point I'm making.
Definitely do not use ChatGPT to give you the answer to a complex mathematical equation, because it will hallucinate. Or it'll just pull from something else that is a quant model, right? I mean, I think, as you're saying, Daniel, you guys are using machine learning because it's more quant. It's not everything.
You know what? I just one last anecdotal thing. I was in London last week, and one of the things we're exploring is also what we can do for further wealth management. And I happen to speak with Daniel, you're going to correct me if I get the term wrong. Is it an ultra high net worth individual? Is that what they're like? God's got a lot of money.
Sounds like sounds right to me.
Private jet territory.
So,
yep.
Yeah, and so, which I don't often do, by the way. So we're talking, and one of the questions my product team asked him said, "How often? He has a private banker. How often do you speak to your private banker? Take a guess how often this guy spoke to his private banker."
Never.
Anyone?
Twice a year.
3 times a day. Go the other extreme.
Yeah.
Every week. He's like, my private banker knows more about me than anyone.
Yeah.
I've been working with this guy for 20 years. So the amount of trust that has developed on that personal level and his complexity in managing his portfolios, it boggles my mind, right? So I can understand, what are we talking about, 0.1% or 0.01%, that kind of guy? He'll have an array of major domos of butlers and drivers and chauffeurs, whatever, looking after his things. And the amount of time and the expertise to manage that, I'm sure that private banker makes some good money doing so. But, there's a huge mass affluence of people out there that maybe do want to talk once a year. What does it mean to buy a house? What does it mean to buy a second home? How do I plan for my kids' education? I'm going through a divorce. And these are things you need to talk through, either with a tool or with someone in lieu of a tool. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. But it's the context, right? It's not personalization you have to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Context. And on that note, that wraps up today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find out more about you? Ken?
Snowdrop at snowdropsolutions.com. Love to hear from you.
Awesome. And Fernanda?
Yeah, we're online at Make Clio and on LinkedIn.
Amazing. And Daniel?
You can find us at stratify.io. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can download our app from the app stores.
Awesome. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you like what you've heard, why not share this podcast with a colleague or a friend? As always, if you want to join the conversation, find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or FinTech Insider, or email podcast@11fs.com. Thanks very much, and goodbye. In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's VANTA.com/insider.